Hello, everybody. Just wanting to welcome you to the CivicSpark Poster Symposium series. We're celebrating our accomplishments of our 1920 CivicSpark Fellows today. My name is Savannah Rose. I'm the Northern California Sacramento Regional Coordinator here for CivicSpark, a national service program for the Local Government Commission. I will be facilitating today's session, Troubled Waters, Rethinking Our Limited Resource. Just wanting to start out with some logistical details before we get started. If you do experience technical challenges during today's call, please message Ayelet directly using the chat function so she can help you troubleshoot, as I'm not able to see incoming messages. Just wanting to let you know that every fellow will have around 5 to 6 minutes to present their capstone posters and supplementary slides. Their posters are summarizing key accomplishments from their 11-month service term with AmeriCorps to the local governments across California. After each presentation, we will open it up for a couple questions for the audience, which you may ask directly by unmuting yourself or sending it through the chat function for Ayelet to read off. We are also excited to announce that we have a new interactive tool in the pipeline to visually identify where each fellow is serving, as well as just PDFs of the capstone posters that will be available through this tool. We're still waiting on that tool to come to fruition, so my colleague will actually be sending that out to all the attendees in this session once it's been completed. Finally, on the audience participation piece, just wanting to encourage that. Please share your encouragement and congratulations through the chat box. We also encourage you all to use your webcams if that's available to you. So without further ado, getting started to the main show. We'll start by hearing from Ayelet from County of San Luis Obispo, followed by Dario, who's serving with the city of Fontana. Sorry about that.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Savannah. Like Savannah said, my name is Ayelet, and for the past 2 years, I've served with the County of San Luis Obispo. And I'm really excited to share with you today about a project I truly consider an innovative way of rethinking our limited resources, which is one of the themes of today's panel. So as many of us know, all across California, residents are facing challenges when it comes to housing availability and affordability. And this is also the case in the County of San Luis Obispo, which is considered the 6th least affordable housing market in the country. There's not enough housing stock to meet demand, and new development is often prohibitively expensive for much of our population. One of the ways that the state pushes local governments to plan for and support housing is the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, also called RHNA, which is determined by the California Department of Housing and Community Development. It is the number of housing units at specified income levels that a jurisdiction must plan for in its housing element, and the San Luis Obispo region has a RHNA of 10,810 units for this current cycle. And this was a 164% increase from the last RHNA cycle, and we only expect that the RHNA will continue to increase as the need for housing increases in the future. So the big question is, how are we going to plan for these units and meet future housing needs? And so the Regional Infrastructure and Strategic Action Plan, which was initiated by the County Board of Supervisors in December 2018, seeks to create a path forward to this. So the regional plan is a coordinated effort among the county and then the 7 cities in our county: Atascadero, Paso Robles, San Luis Obispo, Morro Bay, Pismo Beach, Grover Beach, and Arroyo Grande, as well as the San Luis Obispo Council of Governments. And the goal is to integrate local agencies' housing efforts, identify and prioritize critical regional infrastructure needs, and address the housing and infrastructure shortage countywide with the goal of meeting RHNA. And the county is the lead agency, but as you can see in the bottom right of the poster, there are many other partners and community stakeholders that have been integral to this process. So I'd just like to go over some of the goals and main goals and key deliverables so far in the project. You can go to the next slide, please. The first goal was to develop and enhance regional collaboration. Before our region can move forward on collaborative actions, we need to make sure that there's a lot of trust developed among all the partner agencies. And one of the ways we built trust was through ongoing intensive collaboration with our partner agencies at both the executive, so city manager and city council, and staff levels. The regional leadership helped mitigate some of the hesitancy around regional action by setting the expectation of consensus. And this was signified by the adoption of the San Luis Obispo Countywide Regional Compact. This slide shows some of the regional compact goals. And these were adopted by the county, the 7 cities, and SLOCOG. You can go to the next slide, please. Go back. Anyway, the second goal was aligning land use planning documents. To further this goal, the county convened a housing action team with representatives of city's planning and community development staff to share best practices and develop regional policy priorities. One of the key outcomes from the housing action team was the development of regional chapter, which outlines policies that support thinking and acting regionally. That will be included in every jurisdiction's housing element update. Finally, the third goal was to move from planning to action, and this was in the form of the meat and potatoes of the strategic action plan. And this plan is scheduled to be completed and adopted in 2021. So if you go to the next slide now. So why am I on a water panel talking about a housing plan? Good question. Well, that is because there is a really important critical connection between housing and water that the regional plan seeks to address. Water scarcity is one of the biggest barriers to housing development, particularly in our region, which is significantly reliant on groundwater and has a lot of basins that are in overdraft. Additional housing can only be built where there is enough water to support the new residents. For example, some communities have a policy against issuing will serves to new development because of a lack of water. This quote, the second bullet on this slide, is from the previous county housing element, and it highlights some of the challenges that particularly unincorporated communities, which often rely on private wells or small water systems and septic systems, face in particular. Additionally, providing new community water and wastewater infrastructure, which is often a requirement for development in suburban and rural areas, is expensive and increases development costs. And so some developers may choose to not pursue plans for new housing development due to these costs, or pass along the costs to the consumer, which means that the selling price of the new units would be really expensive. So the regional plan intends to bring housing and water together by investing in infrastructure, for example, new sources of water supply that will unlock housing potential and improve the overall resiliency of our communities. And it's just important to remember that the challenges of housing and water are larger than any single community can handle alone, but through collaboration, the solutions will benefit us all. Are there any questions?
Yeah, so just want to congratulate Ayelet and thank you for your service. I just want you to open up for questions from the audience. So if you want to unmute yourself or type it in the chat box, if you have a question or comment for Ayelet.
We have a question from Julia. How aware is the general public about the connection and concerns of water and the housing nexus?
Hi, Julia. I think that's a really good question. I think that my sense is that the general public, at least in our area, is pretty aware of the relationship between water and housing, especially folks that live in the suburban and rural areas of the county, which is in terms of area is a large percentage of the county. And that's because a lot of them may have been involved in efforts around SIGMA in the GSAs, or because they're engaged in agricultural work, or because they're reliant on their private wells. So that relationship is a bit more at the forefront for people in those areas. I do think public awareness is lower in the cities that have municipal water systems that don't rely just on groundwater or utilize our reservoir system or state water. And so sometimes there is frustration about in the negotiation around where housing should be located, because some communities have water and some don't. So I think there's awareness, but then how that gets how that gets negotiated is like another question in itself. I see Frank's question asking a little bit more about new sources of water supply. So there are some pretty cool projects that are in the pipeline of new sources of water supply. One of the projects that is currently in process is Central Coast Blue, which benefits several cities in the southern part of our county and is advanced water recycling. So it's using wastewater to become drinking water. So that's a new source of supply. Other things that are in discussion are not necessarily new sources of supply, but new management techniques. For instance, crafting new exchange agreements or mutual aid agreements so that communities have more than one source of supply, even though it's not a new source of supply in general. But through partnerships, can increase their water portfolio resiliency in that way.
All right. Thank you, Ayelet. So up next, we will hear from Dario, followed by Zach and Hannah serving in Hidden Valley Lake.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dario Bobeda. I've been serving with the City of Fontana's engineering department for the last year, helping them improve their stormwater management program. So the stormwater management program at the City of Fontana is split up into two parts. It's overseen by the Public Works Department and the Engineering Department. The Engineering Department looks over the WQMP program, which is the Water Quality Management Plan program, which is mandated under the it's federally mandated under the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, and it's overseen by the state's Water Quality Control Resources Board through the MS4 program, which is the Municipal Separate Stormwater Sewer System program. And so the city identified two different ways for us to address helping the stormwater program. First was by updating the municipal code to give the city better laws to enforce the program. And the second was to improve or to update their WQMP work plan, which is the internal document used by the city of Fontana's engineering department to process the WQMPs, because it's a lengthy process. It goes from the planning phase all the way to the post-construction phase. And so those two, hopefully updating those two would help them improve the program, and it has. Well, right now we're in the testing phase, but I'm getting ahead of myself, sorry. So to give a little background about WQMPs, WQMPs are, again, like I said, they're under the MS4 permit, and they start from the planning phase, go all the way to the post-construction phase. And they basically look at the hydrological conditions of a site, a development site before construction, and make sure that they're the same post-construction. And hydrological conditions are basically the way water flows through an area and also the way it infiltrates into the ground. This is important because once you develop a site, it loses a lot of its pervious surfaces. And that's a problem because, in California at least, it's a problem because that doesn't allow for the water to infiltrate into the ground and filter and get, clean up the water, and also to infiltrate into the ground and replenish the groundwater. And so this is, the WKMP is used to keep that from happening or to improve that process. So the main way this is done is through BMPs. And there are different types of BMPs. There are structural BMPs, and there's education BMPs, and they're implemented throughout the development site. So they're implemented throughout the development process. So the development, during the construction phase, we have to have sediment control so like if there's rain or anything like that, then the sediment doesn't go into the lakes or rivers and then cause like a lot of pollution. And then education. So once the site is constructed, the people using the site, they need to be educated on like what kind of pollutants they're creating, so that when stormwater hits the area, it's treated correctly. And it's treated mainly through BMPs, which are best management practices. And the construction or the construction version of that, or the structural version of that, is on my poster right there. It's the underground chambers, and that's found throughout Fontana. Fontana is luckily is blessed with soil that will infiltrate the ground. So once the water hits the ground, it'll infiltrate. So that's one of the mandates of the program. The MS4 permit is that if the soil will infiltrate, then you must infiltrate the water. And so throughout the city, they use a lot of these underground chambers. And it's really interesting to me because it's considered a low impact development BMP, but it's not very green. And one of the benefits of some of the BMPs, at least, is that it's green. But you see a lot of you see a lot of, how do I put this? You see the state wants people to use low impact development BMPs to make sure that things are green. But then on the development side, they want to maximize the impervious surfaces in the development side, obviously, because in California, they want the maximum amount of parking space, which is, it's impervious. And so you see a lot of these underground chambers, they allow the maximum impervious surfaces on top while still treating and achieving this goal of treating the water and stuff like that. So that's one of the interesting things I've noticed while working, is that there needs to be more oversight not oversight, but there needs to be more push for finding ways to, make these developers see that, implementing these more low impact development BMPs in terms of like it'll save costs, and also it'll make things look better in terms of like, environmental amenities, greenery, stuff like that. And so, yeah, so the WKMP program oversees all this stuff. And I collaborated with the Public Works Department, engineering, some of the people from fire and safety on updating the work plan to help streamline the process, basically. And then on the municipal code side, it was mainly working with the engineering department's public inspectors to see what they wanted, in terms of enforcement, like code. And that was also achieved by looking at what other states were doing under the same permit. That way, we see what they're doing and see what works for them. And we took from like different bits and pieces from other municipal codes and then modified it for what we wanted in the code as well, in the city's code. And so, yeah, that's basically what I've been doing for the last 2 years. It's been really interesting to see. So, thank you.
Congratulations, Dario, and thank you for your service. I'd like to open up for questions from the audience. So again, if you would like to open up your mic for asking the question directly or having Atlee ask it for you.
Frank typed in the chat, is there a retrofit aspect to the project, or is it mostly focused on new development?
So there's, yeah, it focuses on mainly on new development, but also redevelopment. There's certain criteria that basically if like more impervious surface is put onto the site, then they have to implement the WKMP plan.
And Audrey asks, what are the green options for permeable surfaces or parking lots, for example? Are they that much more expensive, or is it a matter of maintenance expenses?
I think it's actually a matter of space. So you have like infiltration trenches, infiltration basins, but in order to treat like a certain size, you need to have, or a certain amount of runoff, you need to have like a certain size trench to hold the amount of water that's going to run off of there, not only for stormwater purposes, but also for treating purposes. Like you have to detain the water on site in that little basin or whatever, and it has to be so big. And so that cuts down on the amount of parking that you can have. One solution is actually to put in pervious concrete or pervious asphalt, which will allow for parking, but also will treat the stuff as well. But again, it's not as green. So, yeah.
All right, thank you, Dario, for sharing. Up next, we will hear from Zach and Hannah from Hidden Valley Lake. We'll be holding questions until both have presented.
Hello, everyone. My name is Zach Giannotti, and I was one of the fellows here at Hidden Valley Lake Community Services District for this service year. And in our case studies, we'll be discussing how we assessed and responded to aging wastewater infrastructure. This assessment was conducted using only readily available data and did not rely on expensive equipment or contractors to complete. Hopefully, this can be replicated by other utilities in need. HVL-CSD is a small water and wastewater utility in Northern California. 35% of our wastewater pipes are about 50 years old. And in those 50 years, a lot can happen. Cracks, full circle breaks, roots forcing their way into the pipes. These are all very common problems. And this can lead to greater problems when stormwater and groundwater enter the equation. When stormwater can enter through surface access points. This is called inflow. And groundwater can enter when during the wet season, water pressure can increase and force its way inside of the pipes. And this is called infiltration. Together, inflow and infiltration is referred to as I&I, which we'll be referring to a lot. So the wastewater infrastructure that was built to handle a set volume of wastewater produced from a community is now inundated by torrential amounts of stormwater and groundwater that can displace wastewater and bring it to the surface of the community. And this is called a sewer system overflow. Or it can overwhelm and damage the wastewater treatment plant. These are huge problems, both costly and potentially environmentally dangerous. And both of these things occurred in February of 2017 when localized stormwater flooding occurred in lift station 2, which is the south end of the map on this slide. And infiltration throughout the community wreaked havoc and cost the district and the community much to repair. To understand this problem as a whole, we wanted to see what our data could tell us about this problem. Our wastewater treatment, our wastewater system is broken up into 8 subbasins. Each of these subbasins has a lift station at the lowest point, So wastewater flows down to this point, and in that lift station, there are pumps that will transport that wastewater to a larger basin or onto our wastewater treatment plant. There is data at each of these points, pumps. Ideally, they would have flow monitors, as some pumps do, but alas, ours do not. What they do have is meters that record the hours the pump has ran. This is directly related to wastewater flow and the overall volume of the wastewater experienced in each subbasin. And this is the first bit of information that we used for our study. And to understand how stormwater and groundwater act throughout our system, we could use precipitation measurements, but they don't always reflect how stormwater acts once it's on the ground and how it can interact with groundwater. So we look for something else nearby that is highly affected by stormwater and groundwater. What we landed on is our highly seasonal creek, Poudre Creek, which is the outflow for our watershed. Poudre Creek can be dry in the summer and has flows as high as 13,000 cubic feet per second in the winter. Luckily, Poudre Creek is monitored by the USGS, and the data can be easily found online. This is how we came up with these graphs on this first page. It's a little hard to see, but the orange that you see on each of the graphs is the average lift station hours ran per month, and the blue line is the average flow of Poudre Creek per month. And as you can kind of see, the trends mirror each other. So we decided to look further into this. Next slide, please. And we broke down the data into a wet season and dry season. And what we found is, on average, across the board, there was an increase in run times during the wet season. And the worst subbasins were lift stations 6, 4, followed by 5. Coincidentally, these are the subbasins with the 50-year-old pipes. But we wanted to make sure that we were understanding the data to the best of our knowledge. So we went further and contextualized it, next slide please, by the number of active users. That's this map here. And the miles of pipe in each subbasin and the inch diameter miles per pipe, or miles per subbasin, which is a common unit in I&I studies. And always with any sort of contextualization, we see that lift stations 6, 4, followed by 5 have the highest rates of I&I. Some of you keen listeners might be confused by these findings because I mentioned at the start that lift station 2 was literally flooded in 2017. So why does it appear to have some of the lowest rates of I&I? Well, when flooding occurs, we call in backup. We get pumper trucks that supplement the work of our in-ground infrastructure. So this study doesn't do a great job of capturing massive inflow events because we often have extra help, but it does do a good job of capturing infiltration as a whole. To replicate this project, all you need to do is have some time-stamped pump data and some sort of indicator of watershed activity, whether that's lake level, stream level, rain gauge, or something else. And with a little Excel work, you can use this form of study to inform your asset management or capital improvement plan to address I&I and mitigate sewer system overflows and the dangers to wastewater system treatment plants and the community. Thank you for your time. And now we will hear from my co-fellow who will talk about how to respond to I&I once you have determined its location.
All right, thank you, Zach. That was an awesome job. Hi, everybody. My name is Hannah Davidson, and I'm also serving over there with Zach at the Hidden Valley Lake Community Services District, which is a water and wastewater utility in Northern California, Lake County. I'm going to be talking about the implementation aspect of the same project that he just discussed. So basically going over what our field operations department has done so far to reduce I&I. So for anyone just joining us, I'm going to recap a little bit on what I&I is again, because I know it can be a little confusing too. So it stands for infiltration and inflow, where external water enters into a collection system, otherwise known as the sewer, which it basically shouldn't do. So water can enter in 2 different ways, through infiltration, where groundwater enters the pipes, and then through inflow, where stormwater, like from rain, enters through manholes or other openings that lead to the pipes, and those are going to be on the surface. So I&I is actually a really common problem for water and wastewater utilities, and it's recognized by the State Water Board as a very significant problem because it can cause sewer system overflows that threaten public health, and they can also be very costly to fix. So I&I can happen due to aging infrastructure, damaged pipes like from earthquakes, leaks, or other things that threaten basically the structural integrity of the collection system. So most wastewater treatment systems, they're also only designed to treat up to a certain amount of waste. And then when excess water enters the system, it can become overwhelmed since it may reach or surpass its treatment capacity. So the overall goal of I&I repairs is to make sure that the only thing entering into the treatment plant is that waste. Although there's always going to be some level of I&I present, even with the most sophisticated systems out there, or with places that have the most money. So our repairs, they're in response again to 3 different sewer system overflows that happened in the community, and they were caused by heavy rain events that occurred in 2017. We also had an incident at our wastewater treatment plant where sewage in our equalization basin, it overflowed into our storage reservoir. We did receive a notice of violation from the State Water Board, and that's when our whole I&I efforts began. So basically, based on the studies done, which Zach briefly talked about, our field operation department, they are responding by pinpointing and completing pipe repairs, replacing aged manhole lids with airtight ones that keep water out, and also by continuing to analyze flow monitor data that records our progress. So fixing repairs reduces I&I in a pretty straightforward way, since a damaged sewer line can introduce outside substances into the pipes if there's something like an opening. We were able to contract a company to camera one of our lines. So basically what they did is they put a camera into the pipe to inspect it for damages from the inside. They did find issues there, but unfortunately we do need to get another contractor because that company doesn't have the necessary equipment to fix it. But someday we'll get there. As for the manholes, we are working on replacing outdated cast iron lids with new airtight ones so that water is kept out. Many of them are very aged and they have cracks and other damages that come with them just by being on the street alone. We're hoping to eventually get around to fixing damaged cement, which is outside of those manholes, since cracks along there can also introduce water into the pipes. Looking at the map on the poster, you can see where our manhole lid replacements took place in the past few months, and those were in the lift station 2 sub-basin. Zach did mention before that even though this area was not found to be a problem based on the flow data, we prioritized it because the majority of flooding occurs there, again, due to the really poorly functioning levee that we have. And that's when we get all those pumper trucks and we work overtime and it's very expensive. And then lastly, for our flow monitor analysis, we are continuously reviewing flow levels with devices called flow monitors. And what we do there is we open up manholes and we stick the device into the opening of one of the pipes and it collects data until we either tell it to stop or the batteries die. Using these, we're able to see just how much is actually flowing through the pipe so that we can determine whether or not our repairs are working, and we can also use it to pinpoint other damaged locations in the system. Zach talked about the findings again, and a lot of it is still ongoing research since we're waiting for another rain event to see how flow levels changed. And this year we actually didn't get any rain almost because we're in the drought. So other things that we have been doing is developing SOPs on reporting for field staff operations. Having documents like this increases the efficiency and the reporting ability of our staff, and it helps us to be able to focus on repairs as much as possible. So far, we've developed and are publishing 17 of them, and we have 5 that are still in the works, but there are many more that still have to be done. Overall, we do think that the district, it will carry out the efforts that we and past fellows have been directing, and we think that if enough funding can be secured for repairs, that I&I can be significantly reduced for the better. And yeah, so now we can open up to questions from both Zach's presentation and mine.
Thank you, Hannah and Zach, and congratulations as well. as they mentioned, love to open it up for questions from the audience. If you have them, feel free to chat them in the box or ask them yourself.
From Ayelet, we have, are there any plans to fix the levee?
Not currently. There's a lot of issues with who owns it and funding mechanisms when you don't have technical jurisdiction to manage the floodplain. We have partially own a levee, but there are high-level talks about it currently.
It's basically like a whole lot of like what he said, she said, like no one really wants to take responsibility of it. And it's just very frustrating because we can't really do much about it until we have jurisdiction. So.
Question from Ernie. Have you guys thought of a plan to give the future fellows regarding tackling the I&I issues if there isn't a rainy year next year?
I would say that we would just focus more on the infiltration aspect. So that's like the groundwater, because if there's no rain, there's no, well, there shouldn't be any like, or as much inflow. So you can kind of just focus on the infiltration part, which is just the groundwater portion of it. You can also create kind of like more baseline values for what the actual flow should be in a system. That way, when you do compare it to like when you do compare it to the flow during a rain event, you can see like how much water there typically is and how much there should be versus how much there actually is. And then that difference is basically the amount of I&I that you have. So yeah, just if it's dry, you can also work on more repairs, because basically you can't really replace a manhole lid if it's raining. So just busting out all the repairs that you can and then going from there.
Good point.
Thank you again, you both. Next up, we'll be hearing from Kaila, who is serving with the City of Lakeport, followed by Alfonso, who is serving with Lake County Special Districts.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kaila, and I'm a Resiliency Fellow serving with the City of Lakeport Public Works Department. And today I'll be talking about one of my main components of my water capacity and efficiency assessment project, which was a cost comparison of groundwater versus surface water treatment. And so going into some quick background about the area and water supply and location. The City of Lakeport is about 2 hours north of San Francisco, and we have a population of approximately 5,000 people. The city supplies customers with water one of two ways. The first way is through groundwater. And here we have 4 wells, Green Ranch and Scotts Creek. And these wells get water through the Scotts Valley Aquifer. And then our surface water is supplied from Clear Lake, which, fun fact, is the largest freshwater lake entirely in the state of California. And that water gets treated at our plant. And so we use our surface water on average about 3 months of the year. This is usually between April and July. And this is because the wells that get the groundwater are actually in our creek bed, and the creek is not completely dry until late July. And standing surface water is not allowed to be within 150 feet of the wells when they're running. So that is why we have to use surface water. And luckily our basin is not experiencing any subsidence currently or issues with drying out right now. There's less water demand in our area. The agriculture around here in Lake County used to be a lot of pears, and that used a lot of water. And then we have switched to more vineyards in the area, which use drip irrigation, which is less water consumption. And we've also seen a decrease in water just through better conservation efforts by the community. So part of my tasks in kind of analyzing the costs was compiling and getting all together the PG&E bills for both the wells and surface water treatment plant, and that was from 2017 to 2019. And also, side note, in 2019, the city of Lakeport installed solar panels to both the treatment plant and the wells. So in the near future, we will see more energy costs being reduced, and it's also a more sustainable practice. These were put into operation in early 2020, a few months ago. And so I sort of calculated the supplies we use each year, the chemicals associated with treating the water, and these are things like chlorine and coagulant. And as you can see on my poster, we use a lot more groundwater throughout the year, around 100 million million gallons than surface water, and it is still a lot cheaper to provide our customers. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So here's just like a very quick breakdown of where these costs are coming from. We have chemicals for treating the water, as well as, again, the energy costs. And so for recommendations, the city should consider updating and replacing those wells that I mentioned were in the creek. And by doing that, we can move them out of the creek so that they can run more, but also keeping in mind our water consumption and conservation when using groundwater is also very important. And just in general, it's important to understand and see where the city is spending its money and how much everything costs when we are treating our water. And that's about it. Thank you for listening. I would be happy to answer any questions. And I also have my email right here if you think of one later.
Here, Kaila, congratulations on your service. So as Kaila mentioned, opening up for questions, so feel free to ask the chat box or ask yourself.
And we have a question from Kith asking Kaila, did you look at costs or capacity for conservation as part of the comparison of groundwater and surface water? Curious how that fits into the overall water picture for the city.
So yeah, it was mainly costs when looking at using groundwater versus surface water. And we have seen a reduction in the use of groundwater overall, but the exact capacity can always be reduced. Everyone can conserve water more.
I'm curious, has population changed much over those years and per capita water usage?
Currently we haven't seen like a big influx of population. I think it was only supposed to be like a 1% increase over 10 years, which is pretty small. So that doesn't play a big part in determining water consumption, but can still be factored in.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kaila. So moving on to Alfonso, followed by Megan and Laura, who will be serving at the city of Livermore.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me all right? Just shake your heads. Okay, cool. All right. My name is Alfonso. First, I'd like to start off by thank you all for being here today and joining us for our project symposium. And I'd also like to thank Savannah and Atlee and Kif and all the other CivicSpark staff that made this event possible for us today, despite current events. To start off, I'll give a brief background of my project site and some of their notable achievements throughout the years. So I'm going to slip into a bit of a narrative, so just bear with me. For the past 11 months, I've been living in Lake County, a rural community in the northern region of California, home to Clear Lake, California's largest natural freshwater lake, and it's in the center of the county. Lake County residents actively engage in activities such as agriculture, wine tasting, boating, fishing, and frisbee golfing, which is a sport that I wasn't familiar with until I moved here. But the residents here are very close-knit and welcoming. And folks here are also very passionate about the things they care about and are always looking out for one another, which I think is very admirable of any community. So if you haven't visited, I recommend you doing so when conditions allow. I had the pleasure of working with Lake County Special Districts, a county-wide water and wastewater utility serving over 30,000 people with over 340 miles of collection lines. Special districts has always strived to be proactive and leaders in the sustainable technology. Since the late 1990s, Lake County has led the nation in recycling wastewater for environmental and geothermal benefits by pumping nearly 9 million gallons of effluent daily into the geysers. And 2010, our solar arrays were the largest county-owned solar facilities in the state of California. In 2015, we were the first municipality in the nation to install and utilize blue frog aeration systems, which basically just breaks down biosolids in treatment facilities. And in 2018, we installed the first publicly owned floating solar systems. And we have since then adopted several other forms of green technology. But I want to shift the focus onto something a bit more serious. Climate change is real, and it is a problem affecting nearly all sectors of government and their functionality, regardless of how much technology we can adopt and implement to try to create a more sustainable form of operations. Sometimes it's just nearly not enough, and Lake County is no exception for that. Over the years and for years to come, unless immediate action is taken, Lake County will continue to experience an increase in the intensity and frequency of wildfires and flooding events. Wildfires have nearly broken down in every region of Lake County, and intense rain events flood streets, shorelines, threatening thousands of lives and homes. And you're probably wondering, what do these factors have to do with the wastewater utility company and the rural community? And this is where my project comes in. Next slide. Some of Special District's main and prominent goals are to protect the environment and to ensure public safety. Recent flooding events and wildfire-induced public safety power shutoffs, or PSPSs, have uncovered some of our issues and limited capacities as a utility. Some of these issues include sanitary sewer overflows, aged and damaged infrastructure, and the limited capacity of our staff and equipment, which are basically crucial and essential for our service. And my project, the Asset Management Plan, allows utilities to effectively plan, design, construct, operate, maintain, and renew infrastructure. to uphold these standards and procedures. And adopting an asset management plan, special districts is able to properly and efficiently maintain its infrastructure, identify high-risk zones, and continue their efforts in being proactive. A majority of my time here serving has been focused on developing the asset registry, which is, as you can see on the right there, the first stage in creating an asset management plan. And this sort of registry is the foundation for this plan. It allows utilities to gain a better sense of their assets in terms of their functionality and life expectancies. And next slide. For the sake of project efficiency, I focused in on the city of Clear Lake, which is one of our service areas, by populating over 1,000 features with data collected from as-built plans. These plans contain information of our assets, such as pipe lengths, pipe diameters, pipe materials, slopes, invert elevations, manhole locations, and other sort of identification factors. And inputting this information onto the GIS software is crucial, and it actually increases the accessibility of information to our field staff by giving them more information as they typically engage in a lot of pipe inspection and cleaning. So through this sort of registry, they gain a better sense of how long these pipes are or at what depth their inverts can be located. And now that I've done this component of the project, I was able to identify some areas that were inconsistent with what the GIS maps reflected. And so I have indicated these areas on the left there. You see the inspect regions. That's only a small portion of the city of Clear Lake. It's a lot bigger. But these areas will basically be the starting point of the next Fellows project as they conduct some field verification and just export that data onto the GIS software. And so yeah, an asset management plan isn't something you can create in 11 months like I had. It is a planning document that requires careful and concise analysis of the current state of operations, condition assessments, and general finances in order to be done efficiently. And with each year of service at special districts, we come closer and closer to that goal so that special districts becomes more equipped to face upcoming years of uncertainty. And that concludes my presentations. And I'd gladly take any questions if you have them.
Alfonso. If you have questions for Alfonso, please chat them into the box or ask them by unmuting your mic.
Alfonso, we do have a question. How affordable is the GIS and geolocating software you mentioned? There are so many tools out there, but I know sometimes cost can be significant.
So I would say the GNSS software that we currently have, I looked it up online. It's a couple, it's in the thousands. I can't say for sure what amount. And the GIS software, it's on a subscription basis, and it depends on what kind of purposes you want to use it for. So it ranges in terms of pricing, but you can find that information online.
And was there an asset management program in place prior to you taking on this project?
An explicit asset management plan wasn't implemented, but Special Districts has other forms which are very similar to this document. They have things such as the sanitary sewer overflow management plan, which basically just highlights their procedures in the event of a sanitary sewer overflow. And they have other documents such as operations and maintenance procedures that they abide by throughout the years.
Thank you so much, Alfonso. Next up, we'll hear from Laura. Megan, we're serving with the city of Livermore. We'll be holding off questions until the end of both of their presentations.
Thanks, Savannah. So Laura, Emmons, and I have been serving with the city of Livermore this year, focusing on solutions to localized flooding. So the city of Livermore has suffered from a few severe flood events in the past several years, and the city brought us on this year to address this through sort of an evaluation of an ongoing city program called the Stream Maintenance Program. So Livermore has a number of unique endangered species that live in the creeks, which can sometimes make it difficult for the city to maintain creeks to a high standard because of stringent permitting requirements. So the city's stream maintenance program is a mechanism that allows the city to do that through a streamlined permitting process. But the program has sort of been due for an evaluation to look at different ways that it can function more efficiently and better coordinated with the rest of the city programs. So in order to do this, Laura and I kind of embarked on a research process internally where we met with and surveyed city staff and different consultants all involved in stream, stormwater, and open space management in the city. And then we also interviewed a number of agencies across the Bay Area to learn about their management practices and distilled many of those practices into some best practices and lessons learned for the city. And then we reviewed some more Livermore specific documents like FEMA analyses, historical ecology studies, hazard mitigation planning documents, and Livermore specific liability analyses. So after this whole process, we identified a few major issues. So like many other municipalities in the area, stormwater and stream maintenance is underfunded in Livermore, both through lack of staffing and lack of funding mechanisms. And also the program has sort of grown up out of responding to emergency situations, which can sometimes result in an overly complicated program structure and disjointed administration. And then there are some other issues with the accuracy of asset data and condition asset assessments, so which we'll get into a little more later on. So after identifying all of these potential issues, Laura and I came up with several recommendations, which she'll talk about next. Next slide.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And yeah, so I'm Laura and I've been working with Megan. So after doing all of that research and talking with a lot of people, we kind of compiled everything into the open space and waterways report. So some of the major takeaways were sort of staff identified increased funding, dedicated staffing, and sort of a management vision as necessities for improved outcomes. That proactive integrated management is less expensive and more efficient than kind of a reactive decentralized approach, but sort of the caveat to that is it sort of takes kind of an upfront level of investment to get there, but in the long term it certainly can be more efficient and less expensive by reducing emergency repairs and issues along that nature. So sort of the need to kind of get to that level of maintenance takes a little bit of work. That deferred stream and stormwater maintenance is a major liability risk to the city. And that kind of in the long term, the city will need to review sort of funding and staffing options for stormwater management. So in California, funding stormwater management is not particularly easy. So we've also been kind of making attempts to look at what the options are in terms of funding mechanisms. And so this report sort of led to initiating meetings with management to sort of begin discussing some of these issues and possibly kind of an more integrated approach of managing kind of stream, stormwater, mitigation sites, and open space sort of as one instead of across different departments. And this sort of also initiated discussion about different solutions that would work for the city. So options around streamlining the current program, options around increasing consultant and contractor services, and then different ways to increase staff capacity. And so one kind of big proposal that came out of this was sort of, as I said, integrating a lot of these different types of maintenance into sort of a watershed approach. And a little bit of this has been held up with kind of budgeting issues that obviously have come about in the local government world. but sort of to kind of create an internal position around open space and waterways that would sort of start to build out a framework of the long-term management of these assets, focus on sort of implementing more preventative maintenance, developing sort of formal annual inspections to sort of build institutional knowledge of the system, sort of improve some of the communication and coordination issues, improve the city's relationship with regulators by sort of having like a key point of contact on all of these things, because as Megan mentioned, there's a lot of endangered species, sort of complex regulatory environment in Livermore, and provide the city with sort of someone with a background in environmental management, sort of on the internal side to sort of reduce some of the needed expertise externally, and then sort of increase capacity to access a variety of funding sources, because that was really, you know, a key issue, I think, across the state in stormwater management is the need for more funding. So that was sort of by starting with sort of one position, you could sort of build out more capacity to kind of initiate a lot of funding. Next slide.
Yeah, so the other aspect of our project that I alluded to earlier was an effort to improve the data available to the city on creek conditions and ownership, and to implement new data collection processes and best practices. So the major goals were to provide the city with accurate information on creek ownership, because like in many other cities, creeks in Livermore are sort of a patchwork of ownership, where 1 mile of creek might be owned by several different entities. So sorting out ownership has a lot of implications for maintenance responsibilities, and having accurate information is, just Akif's comment, accurate information is sort of the necessary basis to do that. And then the other focus was creating a GIS-based data collection tool to digitize creek condition assessments and formalize them in a way that would integrate well with existing city work order systems.
So then sort of to focus in on particularly the stream inspection piece. So this was kind of a really key part of the effort. So sort of working to integrate the sort of annual documented stream inspections in a way that will both be really easy for city staff and in a way that will sort of build this long-term knowledge of the system. So that is why we sort of built a GIS-based field app through Survey 123 in order to facilitate in-field data collection that then really easily syncs up with GIS asset data. So then year after year, you sort of are building a database of information on system condition. So we worked then to train and sort of beta test with city staff, kind of updating back and forth with what what would work best with city, with sort of the end goal then of reducing liability, decreasing flood risk, and increasing knowledge of the stream system sort of through this improved data around it. And yes, Rufus is not wearing his pin, but he is a very avid stream inspector. And on the next slide, here's some fun pictures of Rufus inspecting the stream on the light side of stream inspections. But yeah, that's all. Thank you. You can go to that last slide.
Thank you, Megan and Laura. I'd like to open it up for questions from the audience. So as per usual, if you chat your questions into the chat box.
Question from Kith. You've provided some great tools and deep recommendations. Wondering what your recommendations are which of your recommendations are more or less likely to be adopted given the current context?
I think in the current context, there's definitely some like short-term efforts that the city will pursue sort of in terms of streamlining. I think in the long term, they certainly are thinking of implementing sort of this combined watershed approach, but I think it will take some time now with the budget context in order to sort of bring on staff. And then we also made a variety of recommendations around different funding mechanisms. So I think when the staff capacity is available, people will still sort of seek to implement some of those efforts, even if it's not with new staff.
Annie, no, I don't think next year.
What are the endangered species in the creek?
Red-legged frogs, California tiger salamanders, and then Livermore also has like some fairy shrimp and a number of endangered plant species as well.
And like burrowing owls, not direct to the creek, but they're around. The other birds. Rufus will continue to inspect the creeks next year, and he is looking forward to it.
He's an employee of the Alameda County Resource Conservation District.
Well, thank you both for sharing. Wanting to give the floor now to Frank and Tatiana, who are serving with the City of Mount Shasta.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Frank. I'm serving with the City of Mount Shasta, California, up in Siskiyou County, or California's Montana, as we like to call it. So our project this year was to write the city a new stormwater master plan. That is the master document that guides not only the day-to-day operations of the Public Works Department, but also the capital improvement priorities for the city. The city previously had a stormwater master plan, but it was written in 1999, and already by 2003, the city considered it obsolete. It ignored some really important concepts that most people consider when they talk about stormwater. For example, it ignored water quality, climate change, snow management, operations and maintenance, and how to fund projects. As a result, 20 years after this plan was written, less than half of the projects it called for were actually implemented. And so Tatiana and I had the job of updating that plan, which basically meant writing it from scratch and starting over. So it's a very broad document. There's a lot in there. Today, I just want to highlight one aspect of it, which is the use of green infrastructure and low impact development techniques, or LID. The city of Mount Shasta is located in what was once an alpine meadow that has now been heavily urbanized, and some of the agricultural ditches that were originally constructed by some of the town's early inhabitants to bring water to agricultural fields have evolved to become key conveyances in the city's storm drain infrastructure. So a lot of these ditches that were never intended to be urban storm drain ditches have now taken on that role. So one of the big takeaways as we were thinking about multi-benefit projects is just how different the soil conditions are in different parts of the city, and the implications that that has for the feasibility of different infrastructure, green infrastructure and low impact development techniques. So the map that you see on the right side of this slide shows the hydrologic rating of soil groups in the city of Mount Shasta. The darker shades of green are the areas with slower infiltration rates, the areas where precipitation is more likely to run off rather than infiltrate into the soil, whereas the paler shades of green on this map show the areas where runoff infiltrates really readily. And then superimposed on this, we have the dark blue and light blue lines, which are the pipes and conveyances of the city's storm drain network. And this is something that no one had really looked at before we wrote this plan update. But as you can see, the vast majority of the city's storm drain infrastructure that exists now exists in the areas with poorly drained soils. And this is, it's amazing how closely the location of the city's infrastructure matches the soil conditions. And large parts of the city with well-draining soils are completely without developed storm drain infrastructure of any kind. So as we think about storm drain improvements and opportunities to build green infrastructure, we want to be very sensitive to these soil differences. Popular techniques like bioswales and permeable pavement and things like that that are popular in other parts of California don't work in large parts of the city because of the soil conditions, but they do work in other places. And so these two pictures that you see are located, these are two different ditches in the city that are located about a half mile away from each other. The one on the top is in an area with a hydrologic rating of C, so the poorly drained soils, and you can see it's very swampy. It has standing water in it year round, and it has characteristic wetland vegetation growing in it. The bottom picture on this slide shows a ditch in the areas with well-draining soils. And so when we think about the different green infrastructure opportunities for the city, we're thinking that we're going to have to develop basically two very different strategies to implement in different neighborhoods. And wetland restoration is going to be the focus of our areas, the focus of the city in parts that have poorly draining soils, whereas infiltrating runoff through bioswales and permeable pavers and things like that are going to be much more effective in the areas with well-drained soils. Next slide, please. So another aspect of this project was just to catalog the existing system as it exists today, because record keeping was a major barrier to effective management previously. And so we have inspected basically the entire system at this point, which includes over 12 miles of pipes, almost 15 miles of open conveyances, 378 storm drain inlets. And the entire system is interconnected to natural creeks and wetlands, like the one shown on the bottom left of this slide. And so there already are a lot of opportunities to use natural infrastructure like wetlands to deal with stormwater issues. That's something that already exists in the city system. But people are commenting on the rusty pipe picture on the bottom right there. Yes, so there's a ton of deferred maintenance in the system. And that's an enormous problem that we have, where a lot of this infrastructure is going to have to be replaced. But before we can plan and prioritize what needs to be replaced, we have to know what we have currently. And so the asset inspection part was a big part of our project. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned previously, the old stormwater master plan did not include any guidance on operations and maintenance. And so in the update that Tatiana and I wrote, we will for the first time include guidance on operations and maintenance. The old plan also completely ignored snow management, but we are in the mountains and we receive a lot of snow in the winter. And so how stormwater basically the dynamics of stormwater in a situation where you have frequent freeze-thaw cycles and a lot of standing snowbanks that will melt slowly over the course of weeks, as opposed to that runoff being released in a single storm event, is not something that most California cities have to deal with, but we do. And so we have included that in our plan as well. And Tatiana in her presentation will talk a little bit more about the prioritization process of our different projects. But for now, I think we're ready to pause and I'll take questions.
Thank you, Frank. So if you have questions for Frank, please feel free to chat them in the box or unmute yourself and ask them yourself.
I'm going to go ahead and jump in with the voice for a moment, Frank. Thanks. And this is more of actually an all-day question, but I'll put it to you. So many of the projects in today's grouping, like it really depended on you guys going out in the community, mapping, walking, assessing, inventorying, and without fellows or something. How are communities supposed to do this? Or is this just like a hole they fall into until they one day get a fellow or something? I mean, you know, I'm curious about it because it's such a labor-intensive effort you all did.
It definitely is. We put a lot of emphasis on training the Public Works Department how to use Esri software, and particularly the Esri mobile apps, so that now like all of the guys on the Public Works crew have smartphones that can run these Esri apps. And so whereas like when I first arrived in Mount Shasta 2 years ago,
they would come into City Hall all the time to open up these hand-drawn maps in this like enormous dusty binder. And now they can reference these maps in the field. And so hopefully we've built a tool that will save them a lot of time going forward. I think to your point about like the ongoing maintenance and who's responsible for that if fellows aren't around, like that's really the point of long-term capacity building, of trying to get full-time agency staff to be able to take on that responsibility, which is difficult because GIS is hard and complicated and frustrating, but that's the goal. Let's see, Andy Merritt asks, what were some of the biggest challenges in writing the plan? I think lack of documentation on the existing system was one of the big problems for us. We just had to do a lot of detective work to figure out what the current conditions were, because just no one had written stuff down. There was a lot better documentation on the water and the sewer systems, but the storm drains had just been neglected for years. And so we didn't have construction records, stuff like that, yeah.
There's a question about the effective seasonal population.
Yeah, so that's definitely another issue. Like there's a tiny tax base, and so the revenue that the city would need to generate to maintain the system, it's just, yeah, that's inherently difficult. But we're a severely disadvantaged community in terms of our median household income. And so that does qualify us for certain funding opportunities. And so I think having the stormwater master plan is hopefully going to be a tool where we can, document our needs so that we are more eligible for outside funding sources like grants. Whereas when we had an outdated plan, we didn't have a document we could point to that showed what our funding needs were, which made it a lot more difficult to pursue grants through Prop 1 and other sources.
And does the weather of the seasons impact data collection?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, we kind of worked all year. I mean, not when it was like the most snowy, but there are advantages and disadvantages to working at different times of year. Obviously, having water flowing through the storm drain system makes it easier to figure out connections. There's a lot of stuff where we just had to like put tracer dye in a drain and then like walk 100 yards over and see if it's in the next drain or not. And sometimes it wouldn't be, and we'd have to do like elaborate detective work to figure out how things connect. And so working in the winter definitely had its advantages. Also not having like all the deciduous vegetation along our ditches being leafless made it a lot easier to see things. Whereas now that everything's leafed out, it's just like way harder to access certain parts of the system. So advantages and disadvantages. Kif asks, did you write that side GIS tool and training up in your case study or somewhere? I'd love to share that more widely. No, I mean, some things, yes, but we did not try to write the curriculum of a GIS class in our case study, no. Yeah, Annie Merritt's right. That 800 word limit kind of interferes with trying to teach someone how to use GIS in an 800 word case study. Yeah. Cool. So I think Tatiana will take it from here and tell you a little bit more.
Thank you, Frank. Okay, so I decided to base my best practice case study on following state recommendations and guidelines, even when you're not legally required. So as some of you may or may not know, the city of Mount Shasta is an unregulated MS4, and this is basically just because we're such a small rural community that all of the runoff generated here is considered to be insignificant. So even with that being the case, we developed the master plan document in accordance with state resource plan guidelines. So essentially, this means that our plan is functionally equivalent to a resource plan. And this is very important to distinguish because it makes the projects we identified in the plan qualified for grant funding. I want to take a minute to highlight the fact that while we tried to follow the state guidelines as much as possible, we did deviate a little bit just to make the plan more like city specific, because the issues related to the city of Mount Shasta are far different than like Los Angeles or like the coast. So we wanted to really specify it for the city. Okay, so how we customized the plan was in the identification of the multi-benefit capital improvement project and with how we are going to prioritize those projects. So the state requires that all identified projects achieve benefits in at least 2 of the 5 benefit categories. They're shown there as blue square elements with cute little pictures. So on top of those benefits, we also work with city staff to identify additional project benefits. Those can be found as a bullet point list in the left-hand side of this poster. And so now that all of these listed categories and the state required categories will be factored in when prioritizing projects for development. The next slide I made is to briefly show you just what this process would look like. Basically, the projects receive points for each benefit they achieve, and the projects that score the highest will get developed sooner. What you're seeing now is the prioritization matrix we made that essentially account for the 5 state mandated benefits. In the end, the total project scores will be the total score obtained from this table, as well as the additional points added from the city-defined benefits. So that's pretty much it. We definitely had to put in some extra effort in order to follow state guidelines, but I think it's going to be proven worthwhile when these projects receive funding in the end. That's it. I'll take questions if you have any.
Thank you, Tatiana. If our audience has any questions, feel free to ask them or chat them in the box.
Alfonso asks, did you formulate the matrix yourselves or did you reference something or someone?
We kind of dipped into multiple different plans for reference. 3 specifically we used a lot were the City of Reading's resource plan, Yuba City or County, and then Mendocino County. So we kind of made it work.
Alrighty. So we will be rounding out the day, hearing from Brooke Ellie, serving with the Yolo County Flood Control and Water Conservation District.
Hi, yes, so I'm with the Yolo County Flood Control and Water Conservation District, and they are working on the groundwater sustainability plan for the Yolo Subbasin Groundwater Agency. So basically the GSP for Yolo County. And the kind of I've been working on a lot of different components of the project as a whole, but the main focus for my year has been on improving the monitoring network. So what that has looked like has been a couple different things. One of the main pieces has been coordinating with the different monitoring agencies within Yolo County and managing what wells are being monitored and how we're going to handle the data coming in and out. and then collecting and populating the databases for all those wells that are going to be part of the program for the selection of wells in the monitoring network. And then also some physical components like labeling wells, making sure that they have safe access ports and seals on the tops of them, and then making maps for the wells and for the reports, and also working on a survey project to get all of the wells in the program surveyed for their ground surface elevations. So just to those are the kind of bigger topics, and just to dive into them, coordinating with the monitoring agencies and entities. Most of that has continued to be and started out as mainly emailing and calling, but we started to realize that we really needed to formalize it. So I created a groundwater monitoring agreement form and a representative well checklist for those communications. So basically, the different agencies that monitor in Yolo County, either they will continue to monitor those wells and then give us the data that they've collected in a formalized way in the format that we need it, or we can take it over for them, say for a city, we can say we can monitor that well now and take it off their back. So if they do choose to continue the monitoring on their own, which is what most of them have chosen, I've created a checklist of all the steps that they need to take to make sure that their well can be included in our program and that we are all on the same page. So that includes things like making sure that we are talking about the same well, which is surprisingly difficult when you have multiple different identifiers for wells through many different databases. So that's been a big piece of what I've been doing, has been collecting well data on their construction information, their location, and their identifiers like CASGEM, state well numbers, those types of things, and then making sure that everybody's on the same page. So creating files for those specific for each well, and then making a label for each well with a QR code that has its location and construction information and our information. So if anybody decides to destroy that well, for example, they'll contact us, and then we can, take whatever steps we need to take from there. So just as an example of one of the reasons that we needed to make this checklist, because it started out as more just like, hey, send us all the information you have about the well, and then we'll put it into our system. With the cities in Yolo County, they do all their own monitoring for their wells, but their focus is more on production, water production for those wells, not on looking at the aquifer, which is obviously the point of the groundwater sustainability plan. So we asked them as a non-formal, checklist item if any of the wells that we were going to include in the program planned on being destroyed. And, they said, no, we're not going to destroy any of the wells. And then, of course, a couple months down the line, some of them are destroyed and they have plans to destroy even more. So we kind of had to rework and rethink how we went and approached those kinds of conversations, and made them more formalized and, had signatures and everything. So we make sure that not just the person that we're in contact with, but also their supervisors, because maybe they weren't privy to certain conversations and plans. So that's kind of an example of the way the communication's been going, and the importance of having our communication more formalized. And then another kind of big component of what I was doing was just managing all of the ingoing and outgoing data in our databases. So there were lots of different databases. We have our internal ones, then we have external ones through the state. And then I also went and collected photos for each of the wells, which was kind of like, Kif, what you were just talking about, going out and, going to each, of like 200 wells and taking photos of them and entering them into databases and things like that, had been in the plans for our well network in the past, but never really had the time to go out and do it. So that was kind of a really helpful thing, that we finally had the time to go out and collect that information, because it saves so much hassle in the future of making sure we're talking about the same ones. And then also upgrading the well seals. A lot of the wells, some of them just had, cinder blocks on top of them, or honestly, some safety hazards. So we ordered and replaced very nice well seals and put labels on those as well, so that the owners can, make sure that they have safe access to them. And then going back to the survey project, it's really important if you're wanting to look at your well network and how the aquifer is behaving to make sure that all of the wells, all the data that you're having on them is on the same plane. And so we contracted out Jim Frame to go and survey all of the wells in the program, which is about 200 wells, and put a benchmarker so that we know exactly what ground surface elevation all of them are at. And I made a flyer for that project and made sure all the well owners knew what we were doing. And he is just about finished doing that, which is very exciting. And then, yeah, the final pieces were just putting together maps and making sure that the reporting on all of this was consistent with what we had been working on. Yeah, so then for next steps, it's most of it, because I'm leaving kind of in the middle, kind of a random time of year. Most of the things will be ongoing. So continued management of the ingoing and outgoing data, making sure that people have access to the data that we've been collecting, and then that we can continue to communicate with those agencies if changes do happen to the wells that we've selected. And then also there's a couple wells that we're still working on selecting and bringing into the program that we might even make a new well or assign a new well intel SCADA system that's part of our program to one of our wells. So just kind of continued ongoing work from what I'd been doing, and aided by the transition report so they can see what steps need to be taken. But yeah, that's all. Thank you so much to everybody that helped me this year. And yeah, ask any questions you all have.
Thank you, Brooke. So yeah, if you have questions, type them in the chat.
We have a question from Ayelet. Were well owners concerned about privacy when you were encouraging them to join the program and allowing you to access their wells? And if so, how did you navigate that concern?
So the kind of phrasing of who I'm working for gets kind of, so that like Yolo County Flood Control and Water Conservation District, that's a special district within Yolo County. And they, before YSGA, already had a monitoring network. So they already had people that were volunteered to be a part of that program. So we haven't had to do a second phase of going out and asking people to be a part of our program, other than monitoring agencies like, the cities or USBR or something like that. So luckily we already have a selection of people that were on board, but there's still challenges because people forget, or, ownership changes or different things like that. So we definitely did have some obstacles. Luckily, I didn't experience them too much because I only really went to the wells when I took the photos of them the one time. But we have a guy that regularly goes out twice a year for spring, fall and collects data. And he's kind of forms a relationship with them so that everyone's kind of on the same page. And sometimes, there'll be like a dog that gets mad, and you just have to keep up communication because we have contact information for all of them. But when our surveyor went out one day, because they weren't expecting him, they didn't know him, somebody came out with like guns, but they didn't shoot at him or anything. But I felt really bad, but it was okay. And they just wanted to talk to him, but they had guns on them. And he was like, oh my gosh. But he was very nice and professional. And the main thing is just like, we communicate with them in advance, and they did know that he was coming. So that was kind of we were like, well, at least we communicated and they knew. But it was, yeah, even then it's hard. So yeah, good question.
All right. Looks like we don't have any additional questions for Brooke. So with all of that, that is a wrap. I want to thank all our fellows for their hard work and perseverance through the year. Just give one final congratulations to all the fellows who presented today. And thank you all in our audience for your participation, support, and encouragement. So concluding today's session, we continue to encourage you to support our fellows by reaching out on LinkedIn or by the email. All fellow contact information is available on our website. If you would like to attend additional poster sessions, feel free to visit our website for the full schedule of activities and the registration links for the poster symposium and our graduation celebration on July 30th. The next poster session in the series will be addressing California's housing supply. Will be taking place tomorrow at 1 p.m. Just to let you all know that the recordings of these sessions will be available on our website and within a follow-up email sent to all the attendees during the last week of July. So thank you all again for attending today's symposium, and we hope you all have a great rest of your week.